Okay, today I'd like to talk about entry-level telescopes, and this is telescopes I'd recommend for anyone starting out in the wonderful hobby of astronomy. And I'm going to concentrate on observing, and rather than my usual videos which are more kind of imaging based, astrophotography based. I do like to do some observing content also, and I also like to do some content for beginners starting out in the hobby. So this kind of ticks all the boxes for that. My job is to advise on astronomy equipment, and I'm a long time amateur astrophotographer and amateur observer and a graduate in astronomy, so I feel like I've got something to share here. So we're on the site for the company I work for, and we're in the beginner section. I've used a lot of these, and a lot of people who want to test the water with astronomy kind of have a budget of around £200 maximum, $200, and I'd certainly, the most affordable telescope that I think is really good is this Skywatch Heritage 100p. I've owned a couple of these, and I'm actually considering getting a third because it is such a wonderful little telescope. This it's a very small compact telescope with a mirror at the bottom. It's a parabolic mirror, 4-inch, reflects the light to a secondary mirror and then through the eyepiece at the top here, if I can coordinate the cursor. And it's got a red dot finder to help you find objects, and because it's so small you kind of need to use it on a garden table. But one of the reasons I really like this is because, as well as having really good optics for the price, it's on a very sturdy mount. Like normally if you're looking at a price of $129 and you're looking for a tripod mounted telescope, that tripod's going to be very flimsy, and any object you're viewing through the telescope that's on that tripod is going to be wobbling all over the place and probably won't settle indefinitely. Like the slightest gust of wind will be wobbling it. The view will be rock solid. It's such a small mount, compact, robust mount, that if you pop it on a very sturdy garden table, that won't budge an inch. Even if you've got 6-year-olds that are leaning over using it, it will be silky smooth to sort of move left, right, up and down around the sky, to have a tour around, and the focal length so short that you've got a really wide field of view, so really great for sort of open star clusters, but also good for the moon. I mean, I even used it for imaging on the moon. These small focuses aren't usually suitable for astrophotography, but this focuser in particular reaches focus with astronomy cameras, like I've used it with this camera here to take images of the moon, and it came out very well. So that's actually quite an unusual feature, that you can do a spot of astrophotography with the Heritage 150p. So it's a parabolic mirror, which is better than the spherical mirror you can often get at this price range. A spherical mirror won't bring all the light across the mirror to a common focus, but a parabolic mirror will. So this will be sharper than an equivalent spherical mirror, and the smaller models of this have a spherical mirror. If I go back, like the smaller version here, the Skywatch Heritage 76, that's got a spherical mirror. It's a smaller mirror, not as sharp, so I do think it's worth spending the extra money and just starting with the Heritage 100p. If you've got a bit more to spend, the Heritage 130p, as you can see here, it's got 21 5-star reviews. So it's got a 5.1-inch parabolic mirror, very sharp, a good amount of aperture. It's a truss rod design that collapses down. A lot of people start out with that one, so if you can stretch to 189, that's a fantastic choice. The focuses on these aren't that great, but I've got a video about how to modify the focuser and build a light shroud for the Heritage 130p and its bigger brother here, the 150p, which I owned for about 18 months. So I've got a few videos on this one. So this is another one I recommend. If you can stretch to 255, this gives you a 6-inch parabolic mirror. Again, it's a tabletop telescope, so you need a garden table to place it on. The picture's a bit confusing because it kind of shows you, it looks like two focusers, but one's just in the packed down position and one's in the extended position, so it's only one of those focuses you actually get with a telescope. All the Heritage telescopes come with a couple of eyepieces to get you going, so you don't need anything else to get started, and they've all got stable mounts that won't wobble around, like for example looking in a similar price bracket to the 100p, you've got the Skywatch Mercury 707AZ. Even though it's got 3 5-star reviews, because I mean it has got very good optics for the money, the mount would be the Achilles heel. For a start, it's a yoke mount that has this kind of arm that you lock off for moving it up and down. That's going to get quite tiring quite quickly when you're tracking objects, I feel. And you can see how flimsy this pot is here. So there's going to be a bit of wobble with that telescope. So I think the table in that price bracket, a reflecting telescope on a tabletop Dobsonian mount is going to be a lot more stable. I'd always point someone towards that if possible. The benefit from this one is that refractors have just got a lot of longevity. I mean, a reflector would last 30 years easy, I think, but you know, refractors they can be passed down as heirlooms, like you see them on eBay that are 100 years old. Most reflecting telescopes need collimating occasionally to align the mirrors together to give you the best views, but the smaller Heritage 100p doesn't need that, but the 130p and the 150p does. A step up from that would be this fantastic planetary and lunar telescope. Now, I can't exaggerate how good the optics are on a very long focal length Newtonian telescope. They have a very tiny secondary obstruction, so really good contrast, a lot of focal length for good image scale, and because it's easier to figure slow, shallow curved optics, the optical quality on these tends to be very good. I've owned the Skywatcher equivalent of this, and the planetary views were sensational. Like, you could easily see shadow transits of like the Jovian moons of Jupiter, casting a shadow on the face of Jupiter. Just wonderful planetary telescopes these are. I mean, it even says planetary Dobsonian. So this is a ground standing Newtonian, like it, you just plonk it down on the ground, move it up, down, left and right. So very simple to use. Wooden base, very cheap, so most of the money goes into the spectacular optics, and they really are very good on this telescope. Again, this one needs collimating. You can see here you've got the 3 of these screws will be collimation screws, and 3 of them will be locking screws to lock that collimation in place. So you basically have to align that mirror with the secondary mirror and to get the sharpest views. But with such a slow f8 telescope like that, with such long focal length and sloping optics, they tend to hold collimation very well. It tends to be very fast, steeply curved, short telescopes that are quite critical for the collimation. Now, I can also highly recommend the Skywatch StarQuest range to beginners. I've reviewed this telescope here, the 130p, so P stands for parabolic. So if you see a number here and a P at the end of the number, it means 130 millimeters, and the P stands for parabolic. F5 is basically the focal ratio, which is the focal length divided by the aperture, and the lower the number, the faster the optics are, and fast optics are good for the imaging side of things or for giving you a wide field of view. And if that said f8 or f10, that's a slow optics, which are better for sort of planetary lunar, get you more zoomed in. So that's a good indication, that F number, of what you're getting there. Again, 5-star reviews with this. Now this is on an equatorial mount that looks a bit different, and you can align that axis there in the northern hemisphere. You can align that to Polaris, which happens to be the star that's in line with the axis of the Earth. So if you put a line through the rotational axis of the Earth and continued that line, it would reach Polaris. That bright star happens to be pretty much close to that rotational axis of the Earth. So you point this axis towards Polaris, and then you can rotate that mount to track with the rotation of the Earth. Now this has a lot of benefits, because it means you can attach a motor drive, like this £59 add-on motor drive, Right Ascension motor drive, right ascension is the axis that rotates with the Earth. And that means you can, once you've set that up pointing towards Polaris, the celestial pole, with the motor drive going, it will just keep on a target and keep tracking it, which is great if you're observing with one of your kids or your kids. You can get a target in the field of view, and then when your kid comes in and focuses, normally if it wasn't a tracking mount, that object would be gone. But with a tracking mount like this equatorial mount with a motor drive add-on, the object would still be in the center of the eyepiece, and they can spend time focusing to get a sharp image of that. So if you're in a group or observing with your kids, I actually think it's worth 5 minutes of teaching yourself how to polar align an equatorial mount and use an equatorial mount and going for that option. But certainly if you just want to leave your kid to it in the garden, on a garden table, then something like this would be fabulous, because they can just simply move it up, down and left and right, which is good. Now if you're really just solely into the planets, I can recommend a Maxitoff design telescope like this. I mean, they are a bit more expensive. We're looking at, on a decent mount like the AZ Pronto, we're looking at 269. I mean, these prices are relative. I'd like to point out that, like, if I was broadcasting this in the 60s, I'd be pointing you towards 60mm refractors on wobbly mounts that cost the equivalent of $500 or £500, $500. So everything's relative, and even though prices have gone up recently with everything going on, optics are still relatively affordable. As someone who's attempted to grind their own optics and seen how much time and money that takes, I can tell you that even at 269, that is just remarkable value for money for what you're getting. Like, it's a very small tube, but it actually folds the light path. The light goes in, bounces off a mirror, bounces off this mirror, then goes back down the tube, through a hole, up the diagonal to the eyepiece. So the light's travelling really far, even though it's a very short tube. So it's got a lot of focal length that effectively zooms you in on objects. So you've got a narrow field of view, but very zoomed in for a given eyepiece. So perfect for the moon and planets, but also there's very low aberrations, like optical aberrations, aka defects with the view that you're seeing. There's no chromatic aberration, purple colour fringing like the cheaper refractors. The detail tends to be very high fidelity, very sharp. So great planetary lunar telescopes. Now you can have it on this AZ Pronto mount as mentioned with the slow motion controls and use those to smoothly track. Or you could probably get like the StarQuest version of that here, 285. It's on an equatorial mount. You point that towards the polar axis as mentioned, but you can add the motor drive here to that, and then you can just leave it tracking at high powers on a planet or moon and share that with your kids. And that would not, the views through that of the moon and planets are quite spectacular for considering how small it is. Now they do have a corrector plate at the front, a glass plate at the front, and I don't know why they don't supply you with like a dew shield, because they are dew magnets, these compound telescopes, and so I do recommend getting a dew shield. So just to let you know what one of those is. Here we go. So this is a dew shield, and you just place that on the front of your telescope. It keeps out stray light, and it keeps the dew off the front of your corrector plate if you're using a Maxitoff or a Schmidt-Cassegrain telescope that has that thick glass corrector plate at the front of the telescope. I kind of wish they'd kind of include one really. I've actually got a video where I make a shroud for this particular telescope actually somewhere on my channel. A few years back now though. The star sense range from Celestron's pretty a cool concept, I feel. Like I'd definitely try and avoid the entry-level version, this one, because of the mount it's on. It's on like a yoke mount with that kind of arm that locks in to adjust up and down, and I just feel that's going to be quite frustrating really. So, but certainly they do get quite pricey. You're paying quite a lot for the StarSense module, I feel, but the StarSense module is kind of like it guides you using your phone. You place it in the holder and use the app, and it guides you to objects. So it's kind of like a go-to telescope, only it doesn't track itself. You've got a track with the object, but it gets you to the object, which is quite a cool kind of concept, really. And they do them in this Smith Cassegrain, which is similar to the Maxitov. It's a very similar design with the corrector plate that will also benefit from a dew shield, but the 5-inch Smith Cassegrain here is the one NASA took in space, actually. So quite a famous optic, packs quite a punch. They've got an 8-inch Dobsonian version. You are paying a couple of £100 more for the StarSense, which you know that's debatable, really, but they've got this handle, which is quite a nice feature, and the design's quite nice. But certainly, I mean, I'm biased, but I'd find it hard not to choose the Stellar Lyra if you're going for an 8-inch Dobsonian. £200 odd cheaper, better accessories, got a right angle finder scope, correct image orientation, which is going to be easier to use and it won't crook your neck. 2-inch, it's got a dual speed focuser with a brass compression ring on there that's not going to mess up your eyepieces. It can be really easy to focus with that dual speed focuser. Tension adjustment on the altitude axis, so you can get like the tension just right to move it around. And on the base, it's got like proper bearings between those two bits of wood. It's not just like a friction bearing bit of Teflon, it's got like a proper roller bearing. So it's got a few advantages, and it also comes with some better eyepieces, and it's got a fan on the back to get rid of the turbulence when you move it from like a warm room out to the cold air, and there's lots of turbulent current inside the tube that's going to make your image wobble. That fan's going to get that equalised a lot more quickly. Nice big collimation knobs on there as well. So I'd find it really difficult to recommend the StarSense 8-inch Dobsonian over the Stellar Lyra. But if you want the convenience of that app, then that's one, and you're happy to pay the extra 200. I still think it's good. I mean, I'm still interested in it. I think it's quite a cool concept, but I just think the Stellar Lyra you just get better telescope for your money, and you can always use something like Stellarium on your phone to start up. And part of the fun of starting out astronomy is finding things for yourself. So yeah, I think that one will be down to the individual, really. Now, you can get Gti mounts that are relatively affordable, and I'd probably recommend, if someone didn't want to find objects themselves and they were willing to sort of like take out a power supply to power a mount and go through a setup routine, I think I would probably point someone towards the AZ GTI line, which is well proven. Here there's a AZ GTI mount with a Maxitov telescope, which is primarily a planetary lunar telescope. These get good reviews and they're Wi-Fi controlled, so you can just use them with your phone or a tablet. They can be modified for astrophotography down the line as well. You can later adapt it to an equatorial mount, which makes it more suitable for astrophotography. If you move into astrophotography later on, you can pop it onto an equatorial wedge and attach a counterweight, and you're good to go. So I think I would point someone towards if I go to it, the AZ GTI line. Oh, not that one. That's kind of its predecessor. Here we go. So this is the full range of AZ GTI mounts. So you can just get the mount on its own here, or it's bundled with various optical tubes. There's even like a heritage tabletop Dobsonian version where they've put the same Gti system in a tabletop mount, and they've done that with both a Maxitov, which is suitable for planets and lunar, and a more sort of jack of all trades Newtonian reflector. And there's also a short refractor version, which is a rich field refractor suitable for like wide deep sky objects like open clusters and galaxies and objects like that. And yeah, so it's quite a range of telescopes for the AZ GTI mounts, and they're the ones I'd recommend if you were looking for the first tier of go-to mounts for someone starting out. I think the AZ GTI would be the one to go for nowadays, but I feel most people starting out are just testing in the water, and generally people don't want to spend more than around £200 when they're just testing the water, $200, and so I do think the Heritage 150p would be my top pick for a beginner telescope for anyone starting out, testing the water with observing in astronomy. I want to say a big thank you to my channel members Dan the Man, 4Grapples and Ziggy Friends, and until next time, clear skies eventually.